Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we have got a loaded show here as we preview week one officially of the college football season. I'm excited because we're now going to start getting into the groove of what this show is going to look like on a weekly basis throughout the course of the fall. We're going to start things off with Saturday Scouting, where me and my guy Ben Fennell sit down and talk about not just one of the big matchups from this past weekend, Miami, Florida, but then also where Ben is going this week on his first trip of the college football season. I don't want to give too much away, but we'll talk about that trip here with Ben in that segment of the show. Next up, Draft Buzz. Tony Pauline from the Pro Football Network is coming on to talk about just some of the hot items on the wire right now in terms of the NFL draft standpoint. A number of superlatives we'll hit with Tony each and every week, just getting some of the latest buzz on the street, word on the street here from an NFL draft standpoint around the college football landscape. Next up, we are going to go to my notes on one of the top players in the country, scouting report, where this week I'm going to break down one of my personal favorite players in this class, and that's Raekwon Davis, the defensive lineman from Alabama. I think he's got the ability to be an elite talent in the NFL. And then we will wrap things up with Mr. Relevant this week, where Ben Fennell is going to rejoin me on the show, and we're going to talk through my top 25 seniors as we go into the start of the college football season. So top 25 seniors, we'll go down the list from 25 to 1 to close out the show. But let's start things off here. Saturday Scouting, we'll start off recapping Miami versus Florida.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
Well, I'm fired up now for the very first Saturday Scouting segment of the 2019 season. We had a little bit of a taste last week, Ben. We talked about the Florida-Miami game. We're going to talk about that matchup here today. But this is the first one where you are getting ready to go out on the road. Before we dive into the Florida-Miami matchup, how excited are you to kind of get back into the routine of going on the road to college games every week?
Yeah, I miss it. Just being on the road every weekend during the season, it gets to be a drag. It's 3-4 months, so I'm excited to kind of work on draft season and stay out of airports for weekends. But after the summer and things are slow, I'm so anxious to get back on the road, get out to these stadiums and these campuses. And
so we'll get into exactly where you're heading a little bit. But first, let's talk about the Florida-Miami game. First of all, we talked a little bit about that Arizona-Hawaii game, which was a thriller. I don't know if you guys saw the end of that game, but Khalil Tate, the quarterback from Arizona, who we had talked about last week on the show, got him down to the 1-yard line and got tackled just short of the goal line to tie the game on the final play. But let's get to Florida-Miami. Every week, we're going to go through some superlatives from you, right? Coming off the game that you just watched, and you and I both saw a good amount of Florida and Miami. So the first thing I'm always going to ask you every week, your game ball. Who are you giving the game ball to for Florida and Miami?
it was a pretty sloppy game, week one. A lot of penalties. There's some errors, some muff punts, some fumbles, some shoddy offensive line, pass protections. But I have to give it to this Florida defensive line, particularly Jabari Zuniga, John Greenard, the Louisville transfer. They just really got off to that offensive line in Miami, the freshman quarterback, freshman left tackle. They obviously were overmatched. I was surprised to see Zuniga off the edge, some of the bend. He's typically more of a guy that'll slide inside at 3-tech, win with power, but he also showed he could win on those high side rushes off the edge. Yeah,
1.5 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. Gators 10 sacks total against the freshman quarterback there from Miami. I think that's a good group to go with. I had made the point on Twitter. I think that front could be better this year than they were a year ago, and they got a lot of buzz last year. You had guys that were upperclassmen like C.C. Jefferson, who felt like he was on campus for 8 years, but Ja'Kai Polite was obviously a terror for them. But with Zuniga and Greenard, do not sleep on John Greenard. This guy was a terror for Louisville 2 years ago, was voted a team captain, like I mentioned last week on the show, and then had that, I believe it was a shoulder injury or a wrist injury, was lost for the entire season, transferred. He actually grew up a huge Gators fan. So he wanted to go and play for a new school. He thought, why not play for them? And they also happen to have Todd Grantham, his former defense coordinator with Louisville.
Yeah, pretty nice nose tackle too. Kyrie Campbell there.
That's right.
Keeping alleys free for the linebackers. And David Reese is a really interesting linebacker. He may be somebody that plays at a different position in the pros. He's a thick linebacker. He'll actually play in defensive line packages in some of their short yardage.
He did, yeah.
Some of those gap defenses.
That's right,
and as I was watching some preseason tape yesterday, and I see the Jelani Tavais of the world and the Lorenzo Alexanders of the world.
Okay, I like that.
That's kind of the David Reese mold. He's a bit of a larger linebacker that might be able to provide some defensive line play in the NFL.
So my game ball is going to go to a guy that I am kicking myself that I didn't include him in the preview from last week's show. And that's the running back, DJ Dallas, who really, really flashed in this game. They lose Travis Homer. Remember they had who was the name of the running back 2 years ago? Mark Walton. Yes, from Mark Walton from Miami. So you had Mark Walton 2 years ago. You had Travis Homer last year. DJ Dallas was a guy that I remember when I talked with Michael Jackson, the corner out of Miami a year ago at the Combine. Michael Jackson called it, his eyes brightened up as soon as I said, who's the guy that no one's really talking about coming back to the U next year? And he's like, oh, Fat Boy. And I was like, well, who's Fat Boy? And he said, DJ Dallas. And he said, we all kind of bust on him, just because of, because of his body type, but this kid is athletic. He said that he's seen him play corner. He's a crazy athlete. I was blown away. Number one, he had over 120 all-purpose yards in the game. His contact balance was really, really impressive. I thought that this kid really flashed against an SEC opponent. And to me, when we're watching these early season games, these are the games that can really help players kind of get on the map. And some of these early big matchups that are national TV that everybody's kind of focused on, we'll talk about some of them here today on the show. This can really help. So DJ Dallas now goes from being no one really talking about him to now, hey, remember DJ Dallas back in week 1 against Florida? Like, all right, we got to keep watching this guy.
Yeah, and they're going to have to start running the ball to help protect that young quarterback as well. And I think we got a flash of some young tight ends as well in this game. Brevin Jordan at Miami, Kyle Pitts at Florida. That was the number 2 tight end, the number 4 tight end in the 2018 recruiting class, I believe. So 2 guys that aren't draft eligible just yet, but just starting to get a name for themselves and put themselves in the national spotlight.
Flash play from Kadarius Toney as well, who's like a running back, wide receiver hybrid.
High school quarterback, doesn't really fit the running back mold, doesn't really fit the receiver mold. He's not a quarterback. Everything is a manufactured touch. It's some sort of trick play or gadget, quick screen, but you can see the dynamic ability with him.
66-yard touchdown, I believe.
Weaved in and out of defenders there. There's a couple other quick game concepts where he did some nice blocking on the perimeter as well.
Okay.
So someone that's going to have to find his craft with special teams and just getting the ball in his hands.
I know we wanted to talk about C.J. Henderson as well. We talked about him on the show last week as a guy who could be one of the best overall prospects in the entire country. Kind of a really good encapsulation of what he is as a prospect.
I thought it was a perfect snapshot of what his game brings.
Yeah.
He can lock down receivers in the red zone. He's got good ball skills, can play the ball down the field, can really bully receivers that aren't refined in their route running and their technique or that just don't have the speed to run past them. He's long, he's tall, he's got the speed. He's just a little bit tentative tackling, a little bit tentative to stick his nose in, a little bit tentative to kind of impose his physical will. And I think we kind of came up with the comp with Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, which I just thought that last game was a perfect kind of snapshot of what Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie can provide for you. He can lock down those receivers for you. You can be a blanket, a cover island guy. But are you going to be able to stick your nose in and run support? What are you going to do when the ball gets out to you outside? Can you bring down those tacklers?
You remember the morning, because it wasn't that long ago that I watched Henderson. It was a couple weeks ago. And you came in. I had already been watching him for about a game and a half. And you're like, oh, what do you think of Henderson? And I was like, I don't know, like about him coming up and playing against the run. I don't know. He doesn't seem all that willing. Then you watch more and more, and you talked about like the hustle plays he makes. I don't think it's necessarily a competitiveness thing. This is a high school running back who made the move over to defense. Probably a little bit of that mentality still left over. I don't know anything about him personally, so that's the one big hang up here. But seems like a guy, hopefully, that there's some upside there and you can kind of work with.
And they would send him on some cat blitzes quite often, corner blitzes from the perimeter when he's a boundary corner, and he goes in full force. And he's
huge hits on the quarterback.
He's blasted some quarterbacks, so he's willing. It's just a matter of, in the down-to-down basis, being a corner, how aggressive you're going to be, in your ability to tackle and bring down running backs.
He's an outstanding talent, a guy that I'm really, really excited
One of the big plays, he kind of olayed the tackle last week, and I thought the announcers were a little bit too harsh on him. I thought he gave a decent attempt. It wasn't a complete whiff, but I thought they buried him pretty good for his effort on the play.
All right, well, let's get to the game now that you are going to be at, because you are going to the state of Florida.
Yep.
You will. It's not in Tallahassee.
Technically a neutral site game.
Technically.
Yeah. It is in Jacksonville for the Boise State-Florida State matchup. Interesting matchup of a non-Power 5 and Boise State going and seeing.
You don't do many of those typically.
No, not typically. I think I've only done 2 in my ESPN career. I did App State, Miami a couple years ago, and then last year the bowl game.
I was just going to say,
Fresno State, Arizona State.
All right, so let's start now with Boise State on the field. Their defense against Florida State's offense. Players we want to watch. I think the 2 best players in the field are when these 2 units are matched up.
I want to take back what I just said for a second. Calling the Mountain West a non-Power 5, I mean, it's not a Power 5 conference, but there are some quality teams, some quality coaches, and some big-time players in that conference. So no slight to the Mountain West schools, Fresno State, Boise State. very, very competitive programs.
All right, so let's get into it now, and we'll start with what I think is probably the biggest name because he was a big-time recruit, started as a freshman, has made flash plays throughout his career, and that's the running back, a rising junior, Cam Akers, 5'11", 212 pounds. What do you make of Cam Akers coming into this week?
So he was the number 1 running back, possibly the number 2, based on what rankings you look at with him and Najee Harris and some of those other in that touted.
Have you watched Harris yet?
Not a full study. Obviously, I've seen
either.
him enough looking at Alabama tape and watching
Sure.
those offensive linemen and Irv Smith last year and some of those. But Cam Akers just leaves a little bit to be desired out on the field. As a former high school quarterback, kind of a wildcat quarterback, and that offensive line at Florida State last year was just awful.
Dumpster fire.
Absolutely. And it makes a really tough evaluation for the running back. I don't feel like he was really savvy in setting up his blocks, wasn't that instinctual of a runner between the tackles. I thought he bounced prematurely. Tons of fire and traffic in the backfield. Sometimes he got out of it. Sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he looked like he was heavy-footed. Sometimes he looked like he could pick up his feet and kind of accelerate and burst. Showed you a little bit of flash in the pass game, but not enough of a dynamic athlete to really get you excited. I thought he showed you more as a high school player with that Florida State offense and obviously the kind of revolving door at quarterback right now. We have a new scheme this year with Kendall Briles coming in and kind of running that Baylor up-tempo system. I think will help him. But with that offensive line, it just makes for a very, very tough evaluation of a running back.
So when you think back to those Baylor schemes, you know, they had some pretty successful running backs from the college standpoint, guys that put up production because of the spacing. I mean, you saw some of those, you know, the receivers are lined up so far out wide, spreads the defense out, and now you've got lighter boxes and let Cam Akers go. That might be the best recipe for success for him, especially with that offensive line.
But the way he's built, I almost want to see him with a quarterback under center, him 8 yards deep in a single back and get ahead of steam. There's a lot of zone read elements that I felt like it took him a second to kind of get going. Bit of a build-up speed running back, which once he got rolling, he can move and he could take away angles. Obviously, the spacing concept will give him some more lanes to navigate and some more open pastures to kind of...
He doesn't do much for us from an evaluation standpoint.
Exactly.
But it helps him in terms of his numbers.
But word on the street is Florida State's going all in with the up-tempo spread. They're going to have receivers a step off the sideline. They're going to go with a limited playbook, very up-tempo, and try to kind of will their way down the field with just speed and tempo and execution and efficient playbook.
Yeah, pass pro, a big thing I want to see him improve on. But ultimately, when I see him, I see a guy that good athlete, ultimately can be a change of pace, you know, offensive weapon type player, but needs to get better in a lot of different areas. I agree. You and I see him the same way. Let's talk about another guy on that side of the ball, Tamarian Terry, the Florida State wide receiver. I don't know. I know nothing about this kid.
So Tamarian Terry is a very interesting player. He's a good-looking kid. He's a redshirt sophomore, 6'4", just over 200 pounds. He's long. He's strong. He's a size, speed nightmare. He can make a lot of contested catches at the catch point. But again, last year, just a terrible catch rate with the quarterback. Had 35 catches, but 39 incompletions, 700 yards, 8 touchdowns. Is good down in the red zone. Doesn't really win through route running. Wins through being big, his leverage, the catch point. Really struggled to get in and out of breaks, but still a young player, only a redshirt sophomore. Going to have a new quarterback in there, a new system. Hopefully Kendall Briles can find him some isolation matchups just to throw him some jump balls or maybe take advantage of some one-on-one opportunities, but needs to refine his game, his technique, his releases, his route stems, and definitely his hands when they're easier catches than those contested catches.
All right, so the name you want to know on the Boise State defense is a guy that we'll talk about. Both of us have watched him, and that's Curtis Weaver, the defensive end. Was an all-conference player a year ago. I believe he was one of the leaders, if not the leader, in sacks in the Mountain West, if I remember correctly.
Up there,
6'3", 264 pounds. I thought he had some natural strength to him, and he was a pretty fluid kid as well. What did you see from Curtis Weaver?
The one thing I noticed was the balance.
Yeah.
I thought he got knocked around a little bit from some tackles, occasionally would slant in and have to face some guards or maybe get bounced around in that B gap between a guard and a tackle. I thought he stayed on his feet really well, fought through contact, has a variety of moves, he uses hands, which in the college game I absolutely love. He has some long arms, started working some arm overs and some swing moves, has some speed, likes to go to dip the corner. Just like to see a little bit more awareness, get himself more involved, don't get stuck behind the quarterback, retrace your rushes just a little bit more, but 20 and a half sacks over the last 2 years, 28 tackles for loss. Productive player the past 2 seasons, was a freshman All-American 2 years ago. and just has that really good filled out frame. I like his lower half, has that little bit of a bubble in his butt there. I just think he's someone who's going to get stronger, refine the technique, and really kind of turn it on as a junior here.
Yeah, he's a guy that can really help himself in a game like this. Again, we talked about some of those players in these early season matchups that can help build buzz. Hey, and not just in the media, but in scouting circles as well, because, people still watch these early games, and now it's, it gets to be week 2, week 3, maybe some lighter weeks, week 4, and people start saying in scouting circles, hey, did you see that Boise State DM when he did against Florida State? That's how the buzz starts to build. So could be a good opportunity here for Weaver.
And this kid is set up to be a quarterback hunter.
Yeah.
He's going to rush off the edge.
Yep.
They're going to slide him in at 3-tech and try to isolate him against some guards, maybe be a little bit quicker. They'll also line him up at linebacker in some third down pressure packages and rush him from depth, getting a head of steam through the A-gaps,
like
maybe some fire X's. So by all means, he's a chess piece, and they get into third and medium, third and long. He's hunting quarterbacks.
Yeah, he's a guy that right now, the way I look at Weaver, upside over polish. I want to continue to see him get a little bit better, but a guy that I'm excited about his upside.
I don't think he has the juice of a Ja'Kai Polite in some of those flash plays that Ja'Kai Polite made in 2017 off the edge.
Okay.
But I could see him having that Ja'Kai Polite type of trajectory in this draft cycle. That he's a little bit quiet right now in the national spotlight.
Just hopefully not on the back end.
Right, exactly. But if he goes and has another 10, 11, 12 sack season, this is a Ja'Kai Polite type of ascension into the draft conversation.
Interesting. All right, well, let's go to the other side of the football. A little bit of buzz, I would say, nationally about this Boise State offensive line. What have you seen from that group overall?
So highly touted group, back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons from Alex Madison. But a bit of a changing at the guard. Sounds like they're going to go with a bit of a backfield by committee. New quarterback as well, with Brett Rippon having left after being a 3-4-year starter up there. The offensive line's highly touted. They had 2 first-teamers last year, in Ezra Cleveland and the left guard Molchan.
Okay.
3 of them are on the preseason first team of Phil Steele's. The right guard as well, Eric Quavato.
Right.
But when I put on the tape, they just leave a little bit to be desired. I think the left tackle, Ezra Cleveland, reminds me a little bit of John Theus out of Georgia. Okay. Really nice college player. Lacks the play strength, lacks the athleticism. I just don't think he really projects to be an NFL tackle. The one I like is the right guard, Quavato. Okay. Reminds me a little bit of Will Hernandez, bit of a mauler. Right. He's big, he's nasty, he's thick. He wants to ruin you. He wants to thump guys and get them on the ground. His play processing and ID is a little bit off at times. They like to pull him a lot. Sometimes he gets confused on what color to block in the hole. But he's probably has the best upside of the group, just seeing the brute physicality. All
right, well, let's go to the other side because Florida State, look, they're a little bit down, obviously, over the last few years, but continue to churn out prospects. I mean, Brian Burns went in the top 20 last year, and we continue to see players get drafted high from that school. And I think one guy that people are pretty high on at this point is a former 5-star recruit, I believe was the #1 D tackle in the country, Marvin Wilson. He's a single-digit number, by the way, for a D tackle, if I remember right. Or no, he's got a weird number.
He might have
21 or
it
9
is 21. Yeah, 21.
Okay.
Yeah,
right,
I was wondering if he changed numbers this year though.
21 is a pretty good number for a D tackle.
#1 overall player, 5-star from Episcopal, the powerhouse high school down in Houston. Barely played as a freshman. Last year started to come on, but don't be alarmed by his numbers. 4 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks.
Yep.
He's a 2-gapper with 1-gap quickness.
I like that. To me, those are the guys that I get very intrigued by.
So there's some guys that played for the University of Alabama that were line of scrimmage dwellers that 2-gapped, and you had no idea if they could get up the field.
Jaron Reed comes
based on what they're asked to do, and he's asked to 2-gap quite a bit. Once they get into third and medium, third and long, he's allowed to shoot up the field. Occasionally will slant away and kind of get up matched up with some tackles where he uses his hands, can bend the corner. This guy is a freak athlete for 6'5", 320. Now, he may be a more productive pro. He's only a junior right now, a true junior. But he's tall, he's long, he's got the bubble butt, the thick thighs, the thick legs, the subtle hand usage to disengage, which I absolutely love from interior trench players. They're not guys that are just stuck on blocks. They're looking to get off blocks, make tackles. Doesn't really have that initial surge or get off the field. But again, he's 2-gapping, he's square stancing most of the time, trying to find ball carriers and shed those blockers once the ball carriers pass him. Likes the quick arm over moves, the swim moves when he can, which I love when you're real heavy on offensive linemen, and then all of a sudden you lay them, you get up the field. You have to play that cat and mouse game, that chess match.
He's got some of that suddenness.
Yeah, but you put on the Clemson game. Just go right to that game last year. Great offensive line, Trevor Lawrence. He looks the part. There's some plays where he's bullying offensive linemen, chasing Trevor Lawrence down, big hits just as the ball is released. A guy that doesn't have the production, but I promise you will be a productive pro.
All right, so next level is a guy that I didn't even hear of before you brought him up and you wanted to talk about him, and that's the linebacker safety hybrid, Hamza Nasruddin. Take us through what this guy brings to the table.
Well, I'm glad he set up his name, so I don't have to say it right now. Yep, but he's 6'4", 211. He's a junior, and I think he's a clone to Clemson safety linebacker Isaiah Simmons.
Really? Okay.
Very similar height, weight,
okay.
Very similar hybrid style position, both being former safeties, slowly moving down to the box and to be that outside linebacker role.
Can I ask you one quick question?
Sure.
What do you look when you see, because that's all the rage now. We've seen it over the last few years. So many guys play that role. There are so many players that I watch that play that position where I'm like, okay, I can buy into this guy in the NFL, and then there's others where I'm like, I don't know what to do with them. What is that line of delineation for you, for guys? What would cause you to buy into a guy that plays that kind of a role?
I guess it's just finding what he does really well. These jack of all trades type are really easy to get excited about, and I know it's a bit of a different package than the Kyle Van Noy's or Jelani Tavais of the world that were more box players that played all over the place. But now you're starting to get those secondary members that are playing all over the place. And I just think the more you can do for your team, whether it's covering tight ends, whether it's matchup assignments, zone coverage, maybe sneaking down and being a will linebacker in some dime packages, working into pressure packages, rushing the passer these days is no longer just for defensive linemen and linebackers. Sure. You have to incorporate your secondary. And if your best athletes are the safeties, which a lot of times are, they're the ones with a little bit more size in the corners, can be a little bit more physical, but usually have every bit of the athleticism. Those are the guys you want all over the field. And I think defensive coordinators are just seeing these guys and saying, I don't need my stud athlete to be the center fielder or to be 20 yards away from the ball every time. Let's work him down into the box. And if he's tough and can hold his own as a football player, he's a linebacker, and he's going to be an outside linebacker. We're going to find him to get closer to the ball and make plays for us. And I think that's exactly what Nasruddin does for Florida State.
If you show that you've got that athleticism to be able to play in space, because not all those guys do. We've seen plenty of guys that play that role, and there are guys that are in this class that I've watched that don't quite have that level of athleticism where they're going to do that in the NFL. There's one thing about doing it in college. Are you going to do that at the next level? That's a question. And then you've got to be able to hold up in the run game. Like, to me, it's like, all right, like if a guy shows that he's willing to be a run participant and he's athletic, and I'd like to see some feel and coverage. Like if you're going to play that role, I need you to have some kind of awareness and understanding how routes are developing around you. Ball skills are great, but having an understanding is more important to me.
And something we talk about a lot, would you rather the reckless player and dial it back or the tentative player and try to get him to amp it up?
Sure, yeah.
And when I watch him, this kid's absolutely reckless. He flies around the field. He's got ejected from games, a targeting hit on Trevor Lawrence last year. But I'll take the guy that's reckless and try to dial it back, then get the tentative guy and try to get him to amp it up. But this Nasruddin, I wrote on the paper here, free safety, center field, half field safety, dime linebacker, matchup and coverage, works into pressure packages on third down with some other linebackers. He's rangy, he's long limbs, he's tall. He'll guard T. Higgins down in the red zone. He's a hard hitter, reckless hitter at times. He covered Jacoby Myers one-on-one.
Receiver,
so he can cover slot receivers, tight ends, tackles well. He's got the range. Look at his interception against Boston College. Screamed across the field. Great closing speed, the ball skills. Had a PBU against NC State very similarly against Jacoby Myers. But just a very interesting player I haven't heard a whole lot about. He was the #1 player in North Carolina a couple years ago. But a guy that I just think is going to work his way into the national spotlight this year. I think Florida State's defense is really going to ramp it up this year. And someone that I think will be right up there with Isaiah Simmons, where you say, look at these hybrid safety linebackers. Man, they're suited for the NFL.
Let's get to another guy that gets placed all over the field for Florida State, and that's Levante Taylor. We'll see a little bit more of that versatility this year.
Yeah, interesting player. He's going to switch over to safety.
Yeah.
After having been a corner for the past couple of years.
5-star corner, too.
Yeah, 5-star. His senior numbers came out. I was shocked to see he's just under 5'10", 179.
Yeah.
I didn't expect him to be that light. So moving to that free safety position and maybe being that type of Ladarius Webb, the way he transitioned from corner to safety with the Ravens.
I like that.
But I'm going to leave 2019 to be kind of a blank slate for him. You know, it was a bit of a clunky year last year for the entire team, and I think the position change is going to suit him well.
He was banged up last year, too.
He was banged up, and I'm just going to give him the opportunity to write a new script for 2019 and what you can provide to the NFL. He's been on the freak list the past 2 years.
He's a great athlete.
Absolutely. On and off the field. He's testing in the 4.3s, broad jumping 10-10, 40-inch vertical jump, all sorts of squat and bench numbers. So he's a guy that's putting in the work. strong player. Let's just see what he could do on the field in a new position.
Well, next week we'll be hearing all about what your takeaways were from this game. Again, we'll do the game ball, we'll do the off-the-bus guy, the down-the-road freak show, the one-play takeaway, all those other superlatives.
Boise does have a defensive lineman, David Moa. He got a 6th year of eligibility.
That's right. He was senior
I don't
last
really
year,
want to talk about him, but his nickname's the Moa Constrictor.
I mean, he's a first-round pick.
That alone is he moved up my board. I haven't watched a lick of him, but he's high on the board.
All right, I like it. All right, well, Ben, we will talk to you a little bit later in the show for our Mr. Relevant, but let's first now go to Tony Pauline from the Pro Football Network. Let's get into Draft Buzz.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
We're really excited to welcome in the draft analyst extraordinaire from the Pro Football Network. That is one Tony Pauline. You can follow him on Twitter, just like I do, at Tony Pauline. And Tony, let's get into it, man. We talked a little bit about the Florida and Miami matchup with Ben earlier. I want to open this up to you now. Between that game and then the Hawaii-Arizona game that went down to the wire, who's one prospect who really helped himself, whose stock is up after week 0 in college football?
I think you got to look at 2 defensive players from the Florida Gators who really stood out to me. I mean, first would be John Grenard, the transfer from Louisville. Missed almost all of 2018 with an injury. Decided to transfer from Louisville to Florida. He came into the season. I gave him a 3rd-round grade off the 2017 film. A lot of scouts also gave him 3rd-round grades. First game out of the box, 6 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Didn't look like he missed a beat. He's a guy who gets a lot of pressure going up the field, so if he continues to improve on that first performance, you're looking at a top 75 choice. And then the other guy would be Gators safety, Juwan Taylor. I mean, here's a guy who's a backup for Brad Stewart, who I graded as a potential 2nd-round pick. Stewart was suspended for the first 4 games of the season, so in comes Taylor, who was basically a guy who was a part-time starter the prior 2 years, finishes the game with 6 tackles, including 1 tackle for loss. Taylor was a guy who wasn't even on the scouting radar and was not graded coming into the season. But I think now he's basically moved himself into a position where scouts are going to watch him the rest of the year, and he could go from a guy who was off the radar to somebody that if he keeps playing well and works out well could get late-round consideration.
All right, Tony, let's go to the other side of the coin now. Is there one player in particular that maybe you weren't as impressed with and who you're hearing scouts were as impressed with, whose stock is a little bit down after this weekend's action?
I was not impressed with Khalil Tate, of Arizona, the quarterback. And the numbers weren't awful, 22 of 39 passing, 361 passing yards, 3 TDs, and 2 interceptions in the loss to Hawaii. But the fact is he just doesn't look like he's making strides as a passer. He was great running the ball, but at times he just makes some questionable throws. He can be all over the place. He's yet to prove that he's anything other than a real good athlete with a strong arm at the quarterback position. He hasn't made significant strides as a passer, which is what's going to be necessary for him to move into the late rounds of next April's draft.
Well, Tony, every week I'm going to ask you to reveal a small school standout. And when I say a small school standout, I just mean somebody outside of the Power 5. It doesn't need to be, a D3 prospect, although we will cover some D3 and D2 athletes. We could just say if it's a group of 5, an FCS, or D2, D3, who's one small school player that we need to keep an eye on moving forward here?
Keep an eye on a guy from Youngstown State by the name of Justice Reed, an edge rusher. Ironically, he's a Florida transfer. He was given a draftable grade by scouts off the 2017 film, but he missed all of last year with an injury that he suffered during summer camp. He came into the year, was still given a priority free agent grade, goes about 6'3.5", 250 pounds, finished with 5 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks during the Youngstown State victory over Samford, which they won 45-22. And again, he's a guy like we see with Greenard to a lesser extent. Didn't play in 2018 because of an injury. Guy who's more of a smaller edge rusher who gets a lot of pressure up the field, and someone from because how many people watch Youngstown State that nobody are talking about that they really should. I mean, he's the kind of guy that if he continues to have a good season, you and I are going to be watching him practice at the Shrine Game.
All right, Tony, well, let's get to this week's action now. Who's one matchup? And every week you and I will kind of share a matchup that we're both excited about. And who's one matchup, looking around the college football landscape, week 1, that you are most excited to see here this Saturday?
I'm really looking forward to watching Oregon versus Auburn. I think for a couple of reasons. number one, from a national view, this is going to be a tone setter for both teams. I mean, Gus Malzahn is on the hot seat, and Auburn really needs to win, while I believe Oregon is perhaps the most underrated team in the Pac-12. But when you look at it from a scouting perspective, there are some outstanding matchups in this game. First in the trenches, you got Derek Brown, who I gushed over when we talked about when we did our SEC breakdown. I think he's a top 10 pick. He's going to be going up against Shane Lemieux, who a lot of people really like. He's a big, tough, slug-it-out guy in the middle of the Oregon line. He doesn't have great athleticism. He doesn't have great agility, and that's going to be tested against Derek Brown, who is a big man with outstanding agility and athleticism. So the Derek Brown-Shea Lemieux matchup is one I'm going to be looking forward to, as is the Calvin Throckmorton, the Oregon tackle, who'll be squaring off against Marlon Davidson and Nick Coe. I think Throckmorton's a little bit underrated. I don't know that he's going to stay at tackle at the next level, but he's a real good pass protector. And Davidson and Nick Coe provide a lot of upfield pressure and pass rush for Auburn. And then you got a pair of talented but under-the-radar corners at Auburn, Javaris Davis and Noah Igben-Noen, who are going to be trying to stop Justin Herbert. So those two guys really, scouts like them, but they can make big moves, and these are statement games going up against a guy who is projected as, and Justin Herbert is projected as a potential top 5 pick in next April's draft.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when you look at that game, certainly so many blue chip prospects to look at across the board between, Justin Herbert and Derek Brown and everybody on both squads. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch that game. I think when you look into the trenches, like you said, that matchup between Brown and Lemieux and Jake Hansen, those other guys on the interior, we'll see where Throckmorton lines up, if he's at right guard or right tackle. I'll also look at you look at other guys on that Auburn defensive front. Marlon Davidson has been a long-time starter for them, but Nick Coe is a guy that really intrigues me as a 290-pound player, played off the edge mostly last year. He did get some reps on the interior there, but when he steps in now, it looks like he's going to get the majority of the reps inside next to Brown in replacing Dontavius Russell, who was a 4-year starter a year ago, was a senior, was down at the Senior Bowl. So you look at Nick Coe, what he can do as an athletic guy used to playing in space, now sliding inside, could create some matchup problems for that Oregon offensive line. It'll be a lot of fun to watch that matchup. For me, I'm going to stay in the SEC. Talk about Oregon. I'm going to take the rare conference matchup this week where you look at Georgia against Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt, they've got a trio of seniors at running back, wide receiver, and tight end. The running back is Keyshawn Vaughn. We'll talk about him a little bit later in the show. He's a home run hitter, explosive kid in the run game and the passing game. Wide receiver Kalijah Lipscomb has been really, really productive over the course of his career, is chasing after some records set by former Eagles wide receiver Jordan Matthews. And then Jared Pinkney, the other senior, also a tight end, big kid, great ball skills, can do a little bit of everything for them. So you look at those three players matched up against this Georgia defense. And yeah, they've lost some players, especially in that front seven, but Georgia is still a very talented group on that side of the football. So if this Vanderbilt trio, led by a transfer quarterback in Riley Neal, can make some noise against that Georgia defense, that'll do wonders for those guys in their draft stock. We talked about that earlier with Ben, how some of these guys in the week 1 matchup can help build some buzz, not just in the media, but also in the scouting community with some of these early performances. I look at a guy like Pinkney, who does have some buzz going. We've talked about him in the past, Tony. You talk about a guy like Pinkney who's got some buzz going up against that Georgia secondary. They've got two safeties that are really intriguing, with LeCount and J.R. Reed. It's an interesting matchup for him there. I'll be interested to see how Georgia decides to try and defend Jared Pinkney. So I like the matchup decision for you with Oregon and Auburn, but I'll take a look in the SEC. Georgia against Vanderbilt. All right, last question for you, Tony, and we're going to do this every single week, and we're going to call it Mock Draft Roundup. We did it a year ago. We'll look at a mock draft somewhere in the media sphere, see who they have the Eagles selecting, and we'll just talk about the player, not necessarily how he fits in Philadelphia, but just what he is and if the value is right there in round 1. And for the first one, we're going to go with Anthony Pastore from withthefirstpick.com. He's got the Eagles selecting TCU wide receiver Jalen Reagor. We talked about him a couple weeks ago in the Big 12 preview. If any of you guys are out there have been listening, you know that Tony and I kind of see him the same way. Tony, interested to get your thoughts. What do you think of Jalen Reagor here in round 1? What's the value like there?
I think it's a little bit early. I consider him more a third-round talent right now. Okay. We'll have to see if he improves his game, but there's no doubt about it. You know what? As we talked about last year, moving towards the draft, Howie Roseman wanted to improve team speed, and Reagor absolutely does that at the receiver position. He's a guy who's an absolute vertical threat, as a receiver lining up in the flanks, as a receiver lining up in the slot. He's a guy you could use on reverses. I'm sure he's a guy who eventually at the next level will be used as a kick returner. As of right now, I mean, he's a smaller guy. I just don't know that you take a guy that small in the first round. Could be wrong. I mean, he has upside potential. I think he's a good pick for the Eagles, but I think he's more of a day 2 pick than a first-round selection.
Yeah, Tony, and you know how this goes. You know this better than anybody. The guy's with speed, and he's 5'11", 195. My guess is that Rieger, when he goes to the Combine, whether it's next spring or the spring after, he's going to be a sub 4.4 guy, and those players can be wild cards in the draft. I mean, we've seen it time and time and time again. Tavon Austin go in the top 15. Will Fuller go in the top 25. John Ross go in the top 10. I mean, if you've got speed, chances are you could go a little bit earlier than people imagine if all it takes is one team to fall in love with your game-breaking ability. I think Rieger, maybe I do like him a little bit more than you, Tony. I think he's got some game-breaking ability, not just with his speed, but also as a route runner. I saw a little bit more snap to him at the top of his breaks than maybe I expected going in. He can be creative after the catch. I think you can do a little bit with him both in the slot and on the outside. Like I said, he's got the speed to burn, as we know. So I look at Jalen Rieger as a guy that wouldn't shock me if he's talked about. He's going to be talked about leading up, during the season as a first-round pick. But as we get closer to the draft, it wouldn't shock me at all if Jalen Rieger was in that discussion, because I think he is a little bit more than just a speed guy, but an intriguing player to talk about for sure. Well, Tony, really appreciate it. Really excited to keep things going here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We will talk to you next week, talking a little bit about what we saw this week, but also previewing week 2.
Look forward to it.
Well, great stuff there from Tony. And again, you could follow him on Twitter just like I do, at Tony Pauline. And while you're at it, I'm at FDuffy3. That's where I post all of our podcasts that I'm a part of. So the Eli in the Sky podcast, which, by the way, this week we had a special edition of the show. Myself and Greg Cosell, we went and we hosted the Fantasy Football Draft Night over at Lincoln Financial Field, which is an awesome event that the Eagles put on every year over at the stadium. You can go and host your fantasy draft at the stadium in a suite. Food, drink, the cheerleaders are there, alumni's there. Greg and I were there to start things off, and we just did a full hour on who you need to know for fantasy football. So if you're a fantasy football player and your draft is this week, go and check that out if you want to get a little bit of a heads up on some of the players that can help you win your league this year. We're not talking about the elite players. That's second, third, fourth tier players that are maybe sliding under the radar a little bit. Who to go for, who maybe to stay away from in your fantasy drafts. Really fun conversation over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. All right, let's start things off now, or let's keep things going. Another scouting report this week. We're bringing this segment back from last year. This week, we're going to talk about Raekwon Davis, a guy that, to me, is one of the best overall players in the country. He's junior, senior, sophomore, freshman, doesn't matter. Raekwon Davis, to me, is one of the best prospects in America. Let's talk about him now in our scouting report.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the scouting report.
All right, so Raekwon Davis, to me, is this guy was built in a petri dish, because you look at him, he's 6'7", 312 pounds, crazy wingspan for a defensive lineman, spent his time as a left defensive end in that 3-4 scheme, so lined up mostly inside the tackle, sometimes over guards, was moved around a little bit. People forget that this guy had 8.5 sacks, led Alabama 2 seasons ago. Then last year, Quinnen Williams burst on the scene. I think he only finished with 1.5 sacks last year. But Raekwon Davis has the ability to get after the quarterback. He's not a polished pass rusher, but with his combination of size and length and quickness, his ability, he can just kind of overwhelm people and get into the backfield and make plays. I think he just kind of came up short because Quinnen Williams was so darn explosive a year ago and got to the quarterback so quickly. So when you look at Davis, don't think he's just a run plugger, because he's got the ability to impact the passing game. Again, a 20-game starter at left defensive end. What I like most about him is that he is both strong and powerful. What do I mean by that? Strong is that he can hold up in the run game. You take on double teams, he's not getting moved off his spot. But he's also powerful in that if he's trying to take on a block and drive a guy backwards, he can do that. He can move people up front. Outstanding grip strength. His ability to just drive the defender or drive the blocker into the backfield, kind of change the line of scrimmage. Raekwon Davis has that ability to be a disruptive force up front. I talked about the pass rush production, how it dipped last year with Quinnen, but I think he will probably see a spike in pass rush production this year. Would love to see him down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl in some one-on-ones. Kind of prove that you've got that pass rush juice. Show what you can do from a one-on-one standpoint. I think he could really kind of cement himself in that upper echelon of prospects in this draft. Again, no matter what, junior, senior, doesn't matter. I look at Raekwon Davis as one of the top prospects in this class. From a negative standpoint, there are times, look, it's at 6'7", he's going to play a little high at times. So you do worry about that a little bit, just in terms of winning the leverage battle. I do wish he was a little bit quicker, a little bit more violent with his hands, not quickness in terms of foot quickness, but just a little bit sharper with his hand usage. And that's more against the pass, but also against the run, especially getting off blocks. There are times where he stacks and locks his arms out and he's got control of the block. Just disengage a little bit faster, get rid of that block and make a play on the football. Sometimes a little bit slow to do it and the guy can get past him. I'd like to see him do it a little bit faster here as a senior. Dude, when I watch this guy, though, I see him as a DeForest Buckner clone, and I loved Buckner coming out of Oregon, a guy that I thought was an elite prospect because of his ability to impact both the run game and the pass game, his strength, his power, his size, his athleticism. I see all the same things. You check all the same boxes with DeForest Buckner. I guess at his floor, he would be like these other guys we've seen from Alabama, the Jaron Reeds and the Ashawn Robinsons and the like. But to me, this guy is a top 10, top 15 talent, worst, potentially a top 5 pick in the upcoming NFL draft. Raekwon Davis, especially if he can prove himself, whether it's at the Senior Bowl or this season as a pass rusher, this guy is the real deal. All right, let's wrap this show up. Mr. Relevant, this week we're going to talk about Raekwon Davis for sure, but 24 other of the top seniors in the country. Let's get to that now in Mr. Relevant.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
All right, so this week on Mr. Relevant, a little bit of different spin. I'm not going to always use Ben as our special guest, but I thought, you know what, Ben and I have watched so much film together over the last few weeks, over the last couple months, and obviously over the last few years, but watched a lot of these guys going into the college season, and I put together a list of my top 25 seniors that I view. This is just based off my personal opinion. Coming into the year, things can definitely change. Things are definitely fluid. As we know, the book is not written yet on all these guys. They've got one more full year of eligibility. So I thought, you know what? I'll go down the list. Ben tells me if I'm right, if I'm crazy, what's notable. We're not going to go crazy on all 25 names, but we'll just kind of buzz through. Number 25 for me, a guy that I think most are higher on, and I do like the player, is Virginia corner Bryce Hall, 6'2", 202. I love his instincts. I love his ball skills. He's pretty competitive. I just worry about the athletic traits and the speed. That's my question.
I don't think he's going to test particularly well. I think he's going to have a Jawan Williams type of identity in this draft cycle. He's got the ball skills.
He still ended up going second round. Or
Absolutely,
third round,
to the Patriots. And I think teams like that will covet the ball skills, the size, the physicality. I think he's about a 4.55 type of corner, which may scare some teams, but he's going to come in just under 6'2" with the long arms and the ball skills, the production. I have a couple problem plays here and there, getting beat on some back shoulders, getting beat at the catch point, a little bit fidgety on some double moves. Doesn't have his buddy Juan Thornhill this year to kind of funnel in some of those receivers and those balls, so interesting to see how he kind of handles those one-on-one situations this year.
Yeah, I watched that game against NC State last year against Kelvin Harmon, and you'll like Bryce Hall. 24 for me, a guy we actually talked about a little bit earlier in the show, Levante Taylor. And I agree with you. You said blank slate this year. I kind of look at it the same way, and I'm much more likely at this point in the year, going into the season, to be a little bit more optimistic. Glass half full. We talked about that with Daniel Jeremiah a few weeks ago on the show when he was here at the NovaCare Complex. I'm betting on upside right now, and I look at Levante Taylor and I say what he can be with his versatility. I think he could be a really solid sub-package player, which has a lot of value in the league. There's not those athletic questions that you've got with a Bryce Hall. I look at Taylor and say, okay, let's see what he can do at safety.
Yeah, I want him to see some nickel snaps as well, too.
Yeah,
I want to see him cover some nickel, some slot defenders or some slot receivers. He's moving to safety, but let's just buyer beware. This is not Derwin James. This is not 6'3", 220, flying around the field, melting people. This is a 5'9", 180 corner, move to safety, coverage skills, ball skills, and we just want to see what he can do over the middle of the field as opposed to maybe being that smaller outside the numbers corner. All
right, so continue to just jump in. Interrupt me as I'm going. Number 23, West Virginia right tackle Colton McKivitz, 6'6", 310. Thought he was pretty athletic. I liked his length. Do need to see him get a little bit stronger. He plays a little bit high at times, but a guy I actually liked him a little bit more than Yadni Kajust when I watched both of them last fall.
I noted a couple plays of McKivitz while watching Kajust, but I haven't watched really much of him. Once he said he wasn't coming out last year, I kind of
shut the door
put him
on
to bed.
All right, another guy. You and I are both high on this kid, and this is number 22 on my list. Syracuse defensive end Kendall Coleman. Now, a lot of people are high on Alton Robinson, and Robinson has got a ton of physical traits. I mean, first step, flexibility, turn the corner and accelerate, violent hits on the quarterback. He's a high side rusher right now. I need to see him continue to develop those counter moves, prove that he can hold up against the run. I've got him bumped down the list a little bit. He just missed out. But I look at Kendall Coleman. Ben, you and I saw a lot of the same stuff. I mean, this guy is a savvy pass rusher. He uses his hands very well, has a definite plan of attack. Not explosive. He's not. That's one thing that gives me a little bit of pause, is that he's not a guy I think that is going to consistently threaten the corner just based off pure explosiveness. But I'll tell you what, man, he does a great job of kind of flashing his hands, flatten step to try and open up the tackle, thinking that it's going to be an inside move, and then turning the corner. He's got really good flexibility. I like Kendall Coleman.
Knows how to set up angles. Knows how to set up his plan of attack and pass rush plan. I have that underlined, capped, bold, and in red in my notes.
Yes.
And anytime I see that from a player that's just not relying on pure speed, pure athleticism, pure strength, snap jumping, this is a guy with a plan, hand usage, counter moves, very technical player. Him and Alton Robinson each had 10 sacks last year in the ACC.
So good players, yes.
Reminds me a lot of the way Kevin Dodd and Shaq Lawson each had 10 sacks for Clemson. Right. Much better pass rushers, these two.
And I literally, like, a lot of the things I wrote down for him were things I wrote down about, and they're different players than Joe Osman coming out of Central Michigan.
Yes,
Osman has turned into a really good player. Obviously, heard he's on injured reserve now for the Eagles.
It's a fine line between finding these guys that aren't winning with just pure God-given ability and the guys that are very technical.
Yes.
I lean a little bit more towards the technical guys.
I do, too.
And we look at these college edge rushers that just run around tackles.
Yep.
You're not just running around tackles in the NFL.
Not going to fly.
No, absolutely not. And I like the guys with plans, hand usage, counter moves, and you just see that kind of processing throughout the rush.
All right, number 21 for me, another guy I think most people would have higher is Jared Pinkney, the tight end from Vanderbilt. He is my number one senior tight end. Big kid, 6'4", 260. I mean, he's a big, thick kid, and he does move fairly well for a guy that size. I don't think he's a dynamic athlete, and to me, that probably keeps him out of round one discussion because I don't think he's a great blocker like how Hawkinson was last year or anything like that. But I will say this, he's got outstanding hands, outstanding ball skills. He plays the ball really, really well in the air. I want to see a little bit more snap to his routes. I want to see him diversify those releases off the line a little bit, but some things to like there with Pinkney.
I don't know if he's ever going to be that guy with a real good upside in the pass
I don't think
game.
that's
He
him.
reminds me a little bit of like a Bubba Franks. Really
and
soft.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Soft hands, going to be a good red zone target, maybe a QB's best friend on some third and shorts and make some tight window catches.
Yep.
This guy's not beating anybody vertically. He's not going to be a dynamic player with the ball in his hands, but he's a good size player, a good traditional wide tight end for NFL offenses that will block in the run game and then work him in some play action elements. If he could stay on the field and block at the point of attack, maybe even face up a defensive end here and there, that is value in the NFL.
So my next one is number 20, and I'm in the minority here. Like there's no way anybody else has him this high. Tremaine Ankrum, the offensive lineman from Clemson, undersized, 6'3", 312 pounds, played right tackle, also played some right guard for them. Ben, at first I was like, okay, at his size, he's got to play guard. But the more I watched, this kid's good. He's got a really good feel for pass protection. And to me, I watch him, and I see a guy that's going to play in the league. He's a natural bender. I think he uses his hands well. He's a smart kid. He's not super powerful. He's not really long. But I see an NFL player. Like I watch him, and that's a good Clemson O-line. A lot of upperclassmen. Some people really like the left guard, John Simpson. I worry about the athleticism a little bit there. But I look at Ankrum, who didn't make the Senior Bowl watch list. Is very much under the radar right now as a guy that can play in the league.
All I have written down for him is Forrest Lamp ? Similar type of questions.
Yeah.
Inside, outside, Lamp also just above 6'3".
Yep.
Shorter arms. Does he have to move into guard in the NFL? It sounds like the Chargers are going to move him over to left guard there.
Oh, really?
But at Western Kentucky, he gave you no reasons to question his ability at tackle. And same thing with Ankrum here, being right tackle, that Clemson offensive line. Doesn't have that pro length that you would like on paper, but he looks the part on tape.
All right, well, let's go to number 19. Bradley Anai, the defensive end from Utah. I really like Anai, a guy that uses his hands very well. We talked about him last week on the show when we previewed the Pac-12. 6'3", 265, high motor, good pass rush plan, just a good all-around player.
Yeah, he kind of reminded me of a Bradley Chubb, thick edge rusher, more of a edge setter in the run game, a guy that can hold his own in early downs in the run game. But he's got some moves, can slip off blocks. He's big, he's thick, he's a very powerful player. I wonder if he could slide in at 3-tech and some sub-packages in the NFL. But that whole Utah line is very well built.
It's a good group defense. All three levels
no
are
question,
very, very good. Lavert Hill, the corner from Michigan, 5'11", 184. love him in press coverage. And we said the same thing about David Long last year.
This kid looks like he was made in a press corner petri dish.
Yes.
He looks like he was made in a lab.
To me, I look at him and he's got ball skills, solid athlete, solid speed, like more than good enough. He's an NFL starter.
He's got the zone awareness in certain aspects. He's got the press skills. He's even covered some nickels on the inside. I just thought he was a much better player than David Long, who tested off the charts last year, was one of the better cover corners in the Big Ten. I think he's going to have a huge season.
Yeah, I look at these corners, and they're all kind of grouped together for me. And I'm going to put Jeff Gladney next on my list. 5'10", 183, quick. Love him, and he's the opposite. Love him in off coverage. Really good zone awareness. I think he's got a really good feel for playing in space. He's a little bit skinnier. I do worry about his ability to kind of hold up a little bit from a play strength standpoint, but Gladney's got some inside-outside versatility.
There's so much off coverage in the Big 12. Sometimes these teams like Texas, they go and play two-man, and then all of a sudden they end up beating the Baker Mayfields of the world. Get up in receivers' faces. Right. Disrupt on the line of scrimmage. Yep. You don't have to worry about all these double moves and off coverage like these kids. I promise you, Gladney being in off coverage, he's going to give up some double moves. Yep. It's just the name of the game in the Big 12, playing all those offs. Yeah, and then another guy that I'll have, if I had a board and I had like magnets up, all three of these guys would be touching. Christian Fulton from LSU, 6 foot, 194. I think most people are a little bit higher on him than I am. I still like Christian Fulton. Played at left corner for them last year. I like his route recognition skills and man coverage. I think he's got a feel for playing in the hip pocket. He's a good athlete. I just want to see the competitiveness come out a little bit more from him. I really like his teammate Grant Delpit, who definitely has that competitive juice. I want that to kind of rub off on Fulton a little bit. They're going to be a dynamic pair this year. Now that he's completely cleared of all the off-the-field stuff that kind of muddied the beginning of last season, I think he's focused on football, ready to take over that number one corner spot at LSU. Now that Greedy Williams with the Cleveland Browns, he's ready for a big year and to kind of prove himself on and off the field. Let's go to number 15, Zach Moss, running back from Utah, a guy that I really like. I think he's got 3-down ability in the NFL. Not a plus athlete. He's coming off a knee injury, so there's some question there. I love his vision. I love his toughness. I love his contact balance. I like a lot there with Zach Moss. He's a thick kid, too. He's 5'9", every bit of 220, loves the contact. You see the defenders bounce off him. But he's not heavy. He can pick up his feet, and he can step through tacklers, takes away angles with his speed. Doesn't really have the long speed, but has the burst and the acceleration to take away those angles, make plays on the perimeter, turn the edge, and bounce it if he needs to. Julian Aquara is number 14 on my list. Again, a guy I think most people might be a little bit higher on. I do like him, though. 6'5", 240 pounds. Was really productive last year for the Irish. Athletic kid. He's got some juice off the edge. He's got a teammate on the other side, Khalid Kareem, who's a solid player as well. I do want to see him get a little bit stronger, prove that he could be a 3-down player. High character kid from what I've heard. His brother's played in the league, so there's lineage there. I think that this guy's got the ability to stick. I just want to see him prove that he's a 3-down guy. That's the same questions I had for Josh Allen last year at Kentucky. I think they're similar players in height and weight and play style. Just a little bit worried in the run game. We'll talk about Allen a little bit. Getting off blocks and things like that, but he looks the part as a pass rusher. He's long, he's flexible, has that kind of Leonard Floyd type of body. Very exciting player on 3rd down. Number 13 for me, Oregon offensive lineman Shane Lemieux, and it's a very good Oregon offensive line, upper class laden group. I think 4 or 5 seniors on 4 seniors on that group. So really, when you look at Shane Lemieux, to me, a guy that I thought had the best shot, that have the highest ceiling. He's a pretty good athlete, really smart player, a 4-year starter, I believe, for the Ducks. Going to be a 4-year starter. I liked his competitiveness. I liked his feet. Just not a powerful people mover. So get him in a zone scheme. I think the right scheme fit for him allows him to reach that starting upside. The funny thing about all those seniors is they all look the same. Yeah, they're all almost a similar height and weight. The center could play left tackle. The left tackle could play right guard. Right. They're all pretty interchangeable. I don't know if they're going to stick at their current positions in the NFL. Yep. They might all kind of project to be guards or centers. The only guy I have projected to be a tackle is the guy who's not the senior. Right, the true sophomore. Yeah, everybody else, I've got in my guard and center bucket. And we talked about some of those other guys. We talked about them last week. Nice line to have for that quarterback. It is, in his no senior question. All right, let's get into number 12 here. A guy that we're going to see a good matchup this week for him in Georgia. And that's Keyshawn Vaughn, the running back from Vanderbilt, my number 1 senior running back. This kid's explosive. Home run hitter, running game, passing game. I like his speed. I like his burst. I think he's got good enough vision. He's a pretty competitive runner as well. I like what I've seen from Keyshawn Vaughn, a transfer from Illinois. Yeah, if you just want a taste, I did 1 game of him last year against Florida. Unfortunately, got hurt. But throwing that first quarter until he gets hurt, or before he gets hurt. Right. Oh, yeah, the screen pass. 75-yard screen. I think he had another 60-yard run, something like that, through Florida's defense. Yep. Interesting to see an SEC matchup on week 1 or week 2 or whatever we're calling this in college football, but good matchup for him. So pass pro, one area I want to see him prove himself this year to be a 3-down back. Elijah Lipscomb, Jared Pinkney, Keyshawn Vaughn. Nice little Riley Neal. It's
Yep.
a nice little three-headed monster there for Riley Neal to throw the ball to.
No question. Let's go to number 11. Javon Kinlaw just missed my top 10. I like Kinlaw. This kid absolutely looks the part. 6'5", 308 pounds. He is powerful. He can move people, and he's strong. He holds his ground. He's very tough to move. Built really, really well. Prove himself as a pass rusher. Go out. Are you a guy that's just a run stuffer in the NFL with some pass rush upside, or do you have that ability to be an elite guy to get after the quarterback? That's a question I've got about him and some of these other guys
He
we'll
looks
continue
the
to talk
part.
about.
I
No
think he's
question.
going to have like this Chris Jones, Kawan Short type of ascension into the draft cycle where you watch some downs and even some drives and you're like, he doesn't do a whole lot for me. It looks like he takes some plays off or isn't really playing to his ability. You stand next to him pregame. This guy is an absolute freak show body. He's tall, he's long, he's strong, he's thick in all the right parts. I just want to see more production. I want to see him put it together on the field.
So my number 10 guy is a guy that I'm higher on, I think, than pretty much everybody. I think that's probably safe to say.
Yeah.
Cole Cabral, the center from Arizona State. The way I look at it is this. I see a starting center in the NFL. Guy who started his career at left tackle, made the move to center last year, and will now be going into his senior year, his second year at center. I see a starting center. Uses his hands very well. He's got some initial pop. He's athletic. He's great in pass protection. I love his feet. Still kind of coming along on the mental side of the game. I'd like to see him get a little bit stronger as well. Plays a little bit high for a center as well. But I see a starting center. To me, if you're a starting center, you can't not be one of the top senior prospects. I see a guy that I think can play, and really in any scheme.
Yeah, it was fun to buzz through the tape with him. I did one of his opening games last year against Michigan State, and then his bowl game against Florida State, against Fresno State. This guy's never on the ground, which is a great quality for offensive lineman. Having moved from tackle into guard, his play processing is great. Never panics, never rushes to his assignment, never gets thrown off bounds or looks sloppy out there. Looks very calm, under control. Looks like the game is just very slow for him, which is perfect for a center. I've never talked to the kid, never talked to anybody about him. They have Kevin Mawai down there at Arizona State. That's a great mentor for him. Obviously, Herm Edwards, some other NFL lineage in the coaching staff. He's a kid that's very interesting in a deep interior offensive line center class. He could be the cream of the crop.
I like what I've seen from Cole Cabral. Derek Brown is number 9. And people are going to say, how is he not a top 3 prospect for the senior class? I like Derek Brown, but I do question whether or not he's got enough juice to get after the quarterback. I think he's a great run defender. Can he get after the quarterback? And so for me, that's why I knock him down a little bit on my list, just because I wonder from that stage of the game. Love him as a kid. I love everything he stands for. I love the ability to hold up at the point of attack. I just want to see more juice as a pass rusher.
I think he's going to get to the NFL almost like an A'Shaun Robinson.
Sure.
And huge, strong, brute guy you really don't want to ever take off the field.
Second round pick.
Yeah. And he's probably going to go higher than that.
Yep.
But what does he really provide for you on third down? Does he have any twitch in his game?
Yep.
Does he have that first step or any explosive element to be a disruptor? He's strong. He'll get off blocks. He'll tackle ball carriers with one arm.
Yep.
But are you making enough of a disruptive impact?
We'll see him against Shane Lemieux, who we talked about earlier this week.
Great week one matchup.
Great week one matchup. All right, let's get to number 8. Lucas Niang, the right tackle, I believe, from TCU. He's a big kid now, 6'6", over 330. But good flexibility. He's got heavy hands. He can move people. Only out of a 2-point stance. There are some technical things that you'll have to work through, but a guy, to me, I see as a starting tackle in the NFL.
This guy is prototypical size, length, arms, absolute glider.
Yep.
Very smooth mover. Put on the week 2 matchup last year against Chase Young in Ohio State.
No
Even had
doubt.
some matches against Nick Bosa. He looks the part.
Yes.
He didn't get overwhelmed, and I thought he kind of pitched a shutout against some of those elite rushers.
Starting tackle in the NFL.
No question. And has been working with some former NFL offensive line coaches in the summer.
Yep.
Always great to see them working on the craft.
Malik Harrison is a guy that I've got next to my list at number 7. I'm banking on upside here because this guy's got all the physical traits you look for. I'd like to see his eye discipline just get a little bit better. I talked about him at the end of the show last week. Just see things a little bit faster this year in your final season. And to me, you're talking about a guy that can go in the top 50 picks.
Let's say 251.
He's a big dude.
251, yeah.
But he moves like a little bit like 230.
You like him more than Josh Perry a couple years ago at Ohio State?
He moves way better.
I remember Urban saying if it was 10 years earlier, Josh Perry's a first-round pick.
Right.
But today's NFL and that bigger Sam Backer doesn't really have a place.
Dude, he moves. He doesn't move like Shazier and who was the other kid that came out? Darren Lee. He doesn't move like that, but he's like a tier below that from an athleticism.
He's a bit more in that David Reese, thicker linebacker type.
But he moves better than Reese, too.
Interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
he's an athlete. Next up on my list, the guy that's, to me, is just a huge wild card right now. We just don't know where is the health right now for Trey Adams, who was the consensus number 1 tackle going into last year's class, 6'8", 334. He's strong. He's athletic. He's got light feet. 4-year starter at left tackle. He counted the ACL coming off in 2017. Missed most of last year with a back injury. Got to stay healthy. He made the decision to come back, bet on himself, prove that he can, play a full season this year to close out his career. If he can do that, I think that he could go in the top 50.
He's going to be one of these guys. He could pitch an absolute shutout, throw a perfect game for 12 weeks.
Yep.
It's all going to come down to those medicals.
No question.
The knee, the back, those are two things you really don't want to hear being an offensive lineman.
So top 5 senior prospects. I'm going to go number 5, a guy that I know I'm a little bit higher on, and that's Neville Gallimore, because right now I'm saying, okay, what can this guy be? Because Derek Brown is a better player right now than Neville Gallimore. I would say Javon Kinlaw is a better player right now than Neville Gallimore. But I see Gallimore as a guy that's got that 3-down ability to be a true disruptor on the inside. So, yeah, he's strong and holds his ground really well against the run. He's powerful and can move people, and he's got first-step quickness. We talked earlier about 2 gappers with 1-gap quickness. Neville Gallimore has that. So I look at Gallimore and say, okay, if he can clean some things up and be more consistent and consistently stay healthy because he's been dinged up, this guy's got the juice to be able to get after the quarterback.
I want him to show up on tape more.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with you on that.
And I just think some of these SEC guys, Javon Kinlaw, Derek Brown, they're facing some thicker offensive linemen, some more pro-style attacks. The Big 12, it's open spaces. I want him to show up on tape. I want him to disrupt, and your eyes should find him on the tape because he's going to flash that disruption. He's got a great first step.
Yep.
You see him shoot across the line of scrimmage quite a bit. Just want to see him finish and make his presence known. I'm not saying he's going to be a Ndamukong Suh type of presence in the Big 12, but you should be able to find him on tape. I want him to be a little bit more disruptive.
Another guy that I would say I'd put in the same exact boat, different position at defensive end, and that's Darrell Taylor from Tennessee. 6'3", 260. I liked his athleticism. I liked his bend. A guy that, to me, I look at him kind of similar to how I viewed Josh Allen a year ago at this very time, because Josh Allen, before he went on that tear as a senior, everybody was talking about him as a first-round pick. I didn't quite see it from his junior season because I saw a guy who could set the edge. He dropped back in coverage a little bit. Yeah, the production was there, but I didn't see a guy that was really well developed as a pass rusher from a pass rush plan standpoint. I viewed Darrell Taylor kind of the same way. They were both high school receivers that made that move over to defense, was really productive as seniors. I just want to see continue to see improvement, but I'm betting on a guy that I think can be a quarterback hunter in the NFL. I do think he's got that kind of skill set.
Yeah, the play personality I can see, but Josh Allen being more in that 6'5", longer body type.
Longer, yes.
He's more in the 6'3", 260, 265. And I remember studying Landis Durham at Texas A&M, 10.5 sacks in 2017, was ready for a big senior season last year, and kind of flattened off a little bit. And I see a similar style of player, but I'm hoping he continues to ascend and works on the athleticism, where else he could win.
Yeah, he's a guy that we could be sitting here 3 months from now, and I'm like, he's not in my top 25 seniors.
Right.
I feel like he's got.
He's like teetering on the fence right now.
Yeah.
He's shown you some flashes, but now he's an upperclassman.
Let's take that next step.
Yeah, we had to finish now.
All right, top 3. A guy I talked about earlier in the show, Raekwon Davis. Total beast. Don't really need to say much more. I already talked about him earlier in Scouting Report. This guy reminds me of DeForest Buckner, and that's an elite player in the NFL.
Just the one thing just to pay attention to is Alabama, obviously, football factory, pumps out defensive linemen, John Reed, Ashawn Robinson, Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, the whole
Williams,
deal, up and down. He's different.
Yeah.
He's built different. He looks different. He's every bit of 6'7", long arms, long torso. These other guys are bit more squatty, bit more stumps, bit more line of scrimmage dwellers. This guy wants to get upfield, has a bunch of swim moves, bunch of long arm moves, and every bit looks like DeForest Buckner.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Raekwon, and I'm going to go with his teammate at number 2, and people are going to be a little bit shocked by this, I think. I'm going to go Trayvon Diggs, a guy that I'm really intrigued by. Great size, 6'1", 202. I love his athleticism profile. This guy can move as well as anybody in this corner class from what I've studied from the senior group. I like his ball skills. I like his ability to read routes, stay healthy this year, and take another step. I think he's one of the top corners in this class.
Here and there in the SEC, there's some smaller receivers. He looks enormous out there as a cornerback. He's one of these guys which I rarely ever see this with heights and weights by their listed bios, where he actually looks a little taller and looks a little heavier. which normally is the other way on bios.
Right,
Typically,
yep.
they're inflated just a little bit, but I don't know if the receivers he was matching up against were just a little bit frail that week, but he looks broad, he's strong, he's long, and he's not afraid to mix it up on special teams, too.
No question.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And to me, I look at him and I say, like, he's got higher upside than those other corners, the Lavert Hills, the Gladneys, even Christian Fulton. I like Trayvon Diggs.
Wonder what those one-on-ones in the backyard look like against
him and
Stephon Diggs growing up.
Obviously his brother. I really hope Diggs goes to the Senior Bowl. With all these guys, I hope all these guys.
I've heard he's a great
field.
kid off the field as well, too.
I'm a big Diggs fan. Number one, kind of an easy one. This is Justin Herbert. To me, if a franchise quarterback, senior class, he's got to be number one. I like him a lot on film. Gunslinger mentality. He's a big kid. He's athletic. He's got arm talent. Yeah. I don't know how much more there is.
Every game you put on, I see drops all over the place. Yeah. I see throws that maybe he's a very accurate quarterback. Sometimes, like all quarterbacks, they're a little bit off.
Yep.
He just needs a friend in that offense.
Yes.
Somebody make the tough catches for him. Somebody make the catches down by the ankles and those gritty catches. Or when he puts it on you on third down, he's getting blasted in the face. You got to make that catch. And I just don't feel like he had any friends in the offense last year. Losing 1,300-yard receiver Dylan Mitchell to the NFL. Would have loved for him to see him stay with the quarterback. But Herbert, I believe, is getting his brother in there now as a freshman receiver or a tight end. A couple other transfers over there. Juwan Johnson coming from Penn State.
You got that offensive line. Let's go.
Yep, we're ready to go. Yep.
And what stands out to you? Anything crazy? Where am I craziest? I think I know where you're going to go with it, but
no, I think it's all pretty fair. Obviously, the corners are going to be exciting, but the cornerback group is usually dominated by the underclassmen. There's a good group of seniors here that I think are really looking to kind of prove themselves this season. With Christian Fulton and Trayvon Diggs kind of lost his spot last year when they brought in Savion Smith and some of the other transfers, but. The interior offensive lineman, Cole Cabral, is an interesting pick, considering it's a deep kind of landscape with interior offensive linemen across the country. Some other intriguing centers, whether it's Creed Humphrey or Biadas or Ruiz up in Michigan, who are all underclassmen. But as far as the senior list goes here, I think it's pretty strong. It's a lot of players that aren't finesse players.
Yeah.
There's some strong players here that like to win with physicality and bruteness.
You like my type.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm okay with a lot of these. I think Malik Harrison may be one of the more shockings of the group. 6'3", 251. Really isn't
I'm telling you, he
the
moves
mold
well.
of NFL linebackers these days. Everybody wants that 225 that can run and chase and move sideline to sideline. These downhill 250 thumpers kind of have been phased out.
Remember we talked about that with Leighton Vander Esch. Was like, man, like this kid, and he came in at the combine at like 255, and it's like, what's he gonna run? And then he blew the doors off the combine. I don't know how he's going to test, but
there's
Malik
only
Harrison
so
moves
many
really
Vander
well.
Esch's walking
I know,
around, and
I know.
I'll always reserve judgment if he is that type of athlete. It has happened before.
Yep.
It can happen, so we'll see what he does this season.
All right. Well, like I said, this is a very fluid list, and will change throughout the course of the year.
Well,
this is where I stand.
Self-scout yourself. What would be a shocking?
So to me, in terms of like, I as we were going through the list, I told you the guys the players that I thought I was a little bit higher or lower on than most. Just looking at it on face value, though, I would say maybe I'm a little bit higher on Shane Lemieux just looking at the paper than what in my mind's eye, like how I was. I literally went to my sheet and said, all right, how do I have these guys stacked? And Lemieux was a little bit higher than off my memory I would have had him at. But other than that, I feel pretty convicted with how I feel about these. I love Kendall Coleman, the pass rusher from Syracuse. This is a guy that I know he's not going to be a first-round pick, probably not going to be a second-round pick. He's going to be a good player.
We'll have to check with Jim Nagy to see where these guys are on his senior
board.
bowl board.
Jim, put the board out. Let's take a look at that. All right, Ben, great stuff. We'll happy trails. We'll have a good trip to Jacksonville. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, buddy.
Well, that'll do it. Really fun segment there. Just kind of previewing who my top 25 seniors are for the 2019 college football season. Hope you guys enjoyed that. And if you disagree or if you agree, whatever you like, go on, give us a rating, give us a review over on our Apple Podcast page or our Stitcher page, wherever you listen. Just give us a little bit of extra support, that little bit of extra juice as the college football season gets underway is the best way to kind of support the show. So really appreciate everybody that has done that in the past. And look, if you've got questions, you can always hit me up on Twitter at FDiffy3. You can always hit me up there, and I will try and answer it there. But if you want to get it answered on the show, if you want to jump into our draft mailbag segment, now's the time. We'll start taking questions on our Apple Podcast page, on that Stitcher page. Really, if you want to get on the show, that's the number one way to do it and kind of help us out a little bit as well. So really appreciate everybody that has already done that. Hope you guys enjoyed this first edition of our regular season version of the Journey to the Draft podcast. We will see you next week as we preview week 2 and see what happened in week 1.